seeking to take education into the future based on the evidence from research. In this series we're looking very strongly at evidence. What does the evidence from research tell us about various issues related to the world of teaching and learning? In this presentation we're going to look at what research reveals about the effective teacher. The effective teacher. Drawn from various studies, we build up a picture. I've designed this as a kind of cartoon, kind of conversation between two students in a school, talking about their teachers. But this is based on evidence. They might say, my best teachers. Now they wouldn't use these words, but the ideas are there. My best teachers know what they're talking about. Our students can pick up very quickly when we really understand what we're talking about. They also pick up very quickly our enthusiasm about what we're teaching. They want to see that we're committed to what we're doing. We believe in it. We believe in its relevance, its importance. But very importantly, the best teachers are committed to the individual students. They're seeking the best. They're wanting to draw these students out and take them forward. Now, this is not a matter of opinion. These ideas, although put in kind of simple English, these are drawn from various studies to build up a picture of what makes the good teacher. In the previous presentation I described this. This is my words. The good teacher possesses competent and confident expertise with strong learner empathy. Now, of course, we don't know everything about everything. No one can. But in the areas where we're teaching, confident, competent expertise. But we've got the sensitivity to the learner, why they find it difficult, why they can't see the point of it, why they get confused. Empathy for the learner. It's kind of two sides. So we've got that picture there. If you like, that describes the effective teacher. But it raises these questions. How do we gain that competence and how do we enhance it? How do we gain confidence and how do we increase it? And even more difficult, how do we develop skills of empathy for the learner, where we can see the learning experience from the perspective of the learner? We're not just throwing information at them. We're seeing it. How are they receiving it? What are they making of it? What understandings are they getting? Why can they not get this? Why do they not understand that? Where are the problems? How do they relate it to their life? Three difficult questions. But we have to start by asking, what are we trying to do? Think of your own classes. Now, what kind of learner are you trying to develop through your teaching? What's your mental picture of the ideal product, if you like? Think of the student, the learner, at the end of the year's work with you, or 2 years of its longer period. What's your mental picture of the ideal student you want to develop? What's your goal? That's worthwhile. A group of you sitting down, talking it through and writing it down, ideally in one sentence. Not a list of bullet points, because we can't take them all in. Just a sentence. What's the kind of picture of the ideal student that you wish to develop as a result of your teaching? Very important question to ask ourselves. Very important to start with learners. Whatever subject you're teaching, or group of subjects, they may be important, but the really important person is the individual learner. We start with their needs, their aspirations. What do they need to get? What do they need to understand? What are they wanting to do with it? Where is life leading them? You've got to do that in the context of their lifestyle and culture. They don't come out of the blue. They're not machines. They live in families or homes. They have friends. They have hobbies and activities. The particular culture and lifestyle may offer certain kinds of job opportunities. What's their background? And what's their potential future? So we look at our ideal student, what we want to develop in that kind of a context. And when we start by focusing on the learner, not the subject discipline, not its importance, we focus on the learner, then it gives a great starting point in developing to become an effective teacher. That's the problem today. If you look at most countries, you will find that the school curricula are built by a team of writers, and they build around the logic of the subject to be taught. They are experts in some level in that subject. And very often it's built around the supposed needs of higher education, forgetting that in fact large numbers of students leave school and never go to higher education. And the research from higher education shows that they're not very interested in the content that's covered in schools. They've got much deeper agendas, much bigger ones. Now, we don't have any say over that. We've simply got to teach the curricula that are given to us, even though in many ways they are inadequate and poorly designed. But somehow we've got to work within them. But that's the second big problem. Both these problems stop us being effective teachers. They put constraints upon them. You see, we only teach what's going to turn up in the examinations. Our school tests reflect patterns of national and provincial examinations. And if you look at these, local levels, national levels, international levels, most of them are built around recall. If you analyze them, you get the answers by remembering things. That's not the most important thing about education. It is distorting all that we do in the classroom. Now, we have a problem, and it's a problem in every country, in varying degrees. School teachers, we are constrained by things from outside, curricula and examination systems. And they affect the top end of secondary schools, which backwashes all the way down through secondaries and back into primary schools. And it distorts the system. And it makes it much more difficult for us to focus on the learners, to start with the learners. Because we've got this pressing demand. We've got the curriculum to finish. It's got too many topics in it. We've got examinations to face sooner or later. That makes life difficult. And somehow we've got to work within these constraints to keep the learner at the center of our thinking and think that we're developing a human being with a future. That's what education's all about. And tragically, that's true in almost every country. These decisions are taken by people outside schools, and they rarely listen to teachers. And you only have to look at what's happening. You can see that pattern repeated again and again and again. It's perhaps one of the biggest problems in education worldwide today. Everybody thinks they know about what should be in schools because they once went to school. That kind of approach doesn't work with dentistry or medicine or things like that. But it leaves us teachers in a difficult position because there are pressures placed upon us that don't make life easy for us. And they don't help us to think of the learner, the individual learner in your class, and to see them as a human being coming out of a context with hopes and aspirations for their future and life lying ahead of them. But let's return to the effective teacher. Now here is a simple model. Now it is very simple, but it's useful to help our thinking. You can look at teaching in three ways: telling, doing, teamwork. Now sometimes you get combinations of these, but three ways. Teaching as telling means that we are talking, the students are listening. Occasionally they ask a question and we answer. Now there's far too much of that in education today. And that's the picture that is in the public mind of what goes on in schools. Not a good picture. Now of course there's a place for talking and listening, but we need to bring in the other two. Doing means they're developing the skills of the students. They do things. And teamwork means that they're working with each other, usually collaboratively, not competitively. And they're doing things together, and they're learning together. Now, in some countries, you can wander into a classroom and you can see a wonderful balance. Right from nursery education upwards. But it's often best at the nursery education and the primary school education end, where you walk into a teaching area and it's a buzz of activity. The students, the young learners are working together, they're doing things. They're developing skills. Yes, there's talk, there's conversation. The teacher is negotiating and engaging with them, often in group level or individual level. And they're learning a lot. The pressure of curricula and the pressure of examinations forces that out as they get older. And it's not so common at the upper secondary stages of schools, although in some countries it still occurs widely. But there's a simple model. Teaching is telling, doing, or teamwork. Now we're going to look at each of these three, and it's going to be very brief. What does research tell us? What insights can we gain? Now that's the problem. That's the mental picture of education that's worldwide. We, the teacher, are pouring information into the heads of our students who sit there passively absorbing what we tell them, or maybe not absorbing what we tell them. That picture is completely wrong. That's nothing to do with education. Education is not the transfer of what you know into the heads of your students. That's not education. The picture is much better looked at this way. We stressed before that understanding is the central core skill It fits the natural psychology of human beings. We're seeking to make sense of. We're seeking to understand. And our task as teachers is to develop that understanding in our students, so they can make sense of their life, they can make sense of themselves, they can make sense of their relationships. They are equipped to live as human beings and to move forward into whatever area of life may take them. But there's still a danger in that. If you look at the picture at the top, the left-hand person is the teacher, where the understanding, if you like, is kind of organized. And we're trying to transfer that organization, that understanding, into the heads of learners. Doesn't work quite as simply as that, because learners, each one, develops their understanding in their own way. It's not a simple transfer process. But we're encouraging them, thinking of them as individuals, to develop their own understanding and to bring their understanding into line with the evidence, into line with what is generally accepted, what fits the picture best. Whatever subject area we're doing, understanding is the key. Now that raises a lot of key questions. And you need to ask yourself this very clearly and be honest. It's good for teachers in groups, maybe in subject areas, across subject areas, to negotiate and debate these ideas. This set of questions is worth posing. What's our goal? We're coming back to, can we set our goal for the ideal student we're trying to generate at the end of the educational journey? Full of information? Or have they understood what they've been taught? Working memory is critical. Working memory is the single most important factor controlling understanding. In fact, the evidence shows that working memory and understanding how it works and its limitations, that holds a complete control over our understanding of how we teach. If there's going to be understanding, they've got to be able to cope. Their working memory's got to be able to hold the necessary ideas at the same time to make sense of things. Now we know that once they've gained maturity about age 16, the working memory on average can cope with about 7 things at the same time. And there are standard tests to show this. But when they're younger, it's much less. So when they're at primary stages, it's probably only 1, 2, maybe 3 ideas they can hold at the same time. Now, as teachers, we're well aware of this without using that language. We know that certain things cannot be taught too young because it requires too many ideas to be held at the same time. But perhaps the most important thing we need to know if we want to be an effective teacher is to understand the role, the place, and the nature of working memory. Because that's where you do all your understanding, all your thinking, all your solving of problems. It's the only part of the brain that can do it. But they don't come to your class with, as it were, a blank brain. They come with previous understandings, previous experiences, contexts, good things, bad things. How are they going to link what you give them to what they've already got? Are you making the links for them? Are you helping them to make the links meaningfully? Incredibly important. And as a huge amount of research shows, the effective teacher is able to link new material to what they already understanding, so that the understanding is enhanced and enriched. That's true education. But how do they see it? Is it all something abstract and meaningless? Or does it make any sense to them to make enable them to make some sort of sense of their life in the context of their lifestyle, in the context of their social background. If what we give them is going to be seen by them as meaningful, it must help them to move forward in some way. Do we make the connections? Now, it's not easy with some of the curricula we're forced to teach, but it can be done. In simple terms, that's what they want to do, is understanding. That's the natural process. Is it possible? And does their understanding help them forward in the real situation of their own lives? You see, we're back to focusing our thinking on the learner, not the subject matter. And that's a complete change of thought. And that helps us to be much more effective teachers, enhances us. Some key questions that we need to address. To stop for a moment or two and look at this idea, the visual spatial thinker. Time prevents us developing this any further. There's a vast literature on this, but there's much that's still not yet fully known. Just to sow some ideas in your mind. If I say the word plane, do you see it as a word or a mental picture? Now, the visual spatial thinker has nothing to do with being able to draw, nothing to do with artistry. It's a much deeper idea. It comes back to a comparison between the use of symbolics, that's language and number, or mental pictures, which here I've shown as a physical picture of a plane. Now, what the research suggests is this, and this is incomplete. Some learners think in terms of symbols, but many learners, perhaps the majority, think in terms of the visual. That's not necessarily being an artist at all, but they see things as how things relate to each other. The plane, it's got a kind of fuselage, a body. It's got a tail, it's got wings, it's got wheels. The picture captures them all. The symbolics of the word plane doesn't capture that. The trouble with education today is that far too much is dependent on language and number, on the symbolics. But many learners, perhaps the majority, but certainly many, tend to think in terms of how things relate to each other. That we have to take into mind. Some learners like logical sequences, and academic education tends to reward people who do. So most of us tend to think that way. But actually many learners, perhaps the majority, prefer relationships between ideas. It's a different way of thinking. Some learners look to information to gain understanding, but the majority look for patterns and meanings. Different way of thinking. Now stop for a moment. In these presentations, I have tried to take on board the research evidence about the visual spatial thinker. So while I'm using language, spoken, written, you notice how rarely I use a set of bullet points. We know that bullet points is not the natural way for the vast majority of learners. So very often I've used little diagrams. Words are grouped together against a coloured background. And this is trying to help us all, because we're all together in this, to look at this from the point of view of the way your brain naturally works. And your brain naturally works in terms of relationships, meaning, patterns, not bullet point lists, not endless text. So this series of presentations I've been trying to present them in a way that's in line with the way our brains naturally work. We've got to think our teaching along the same lines. Now let's move to teaching as doing. The real problem is this: we've got to be clear what we mean by doing. You see, in some ways, all learning is doing. It's worth pondering that through for a moment or two. The evidence that we really understand something, we've mastered the skill, is when we can do it. So what do we mean by doing when it comes to the situation in schools? Now this quotation has caused terrible problems. You've probably seen it or heard it. It may have been taught to you. I hear and I forget. I see and I remember. I do and I understand. Now it's attributed to the Chinese philosopher Confucius a long time ago. Now he may have been a great philosopher, and he was, but he was a shockingly useless educational thinker. This is utterly misleading. Simply, it's not true, and the evidence shows it's not true. So if you've been taught that this is the way forward, just quietly scrub it out of your mind. In some cases it may help, in many cases it won't. Life is not that simple. And it's not simple for a very simple reason. Research shows you can be very active doing things, but learn more or less nothing. Doesn't take your understanding forward at all. Your brain is so occupied in the doing that the working memory has no space to think about the understanding. You end up being an expert doing something, but it hasn't taken you forward at all, because you don't really understand what you're doing. But there's another problem with this question of doing. What do we mean by doing? You see, as soon as we say doing, we think of practical skills, doing things with our hands, with our bodies. But the doing could equally be mental skills. You could be learning how to repair a bicycle. Practical skills. But equally, you could learn the practical skills of being able to solve a quadratic equation. Both are doing. The person has done something. We may not understand why the bike now works. We may not understand what the purpose of quadratic equations is, but maybe we can do both. We've got to be very clear in our minds what we mean by doing. Now I'm going to say that, put it this way. This is my description based on a lot of evidence. Doing means there's mental engagement leading to increasing understanding. It's not just fixing a bike or solving a quadratic equation, following a method that we've memorized. There's a mental engagement. The gears, if you like, of the working memory are working. And it's leading to an increasing understanding of whatever the material is. We now know more about how the bike works and why fixing it this way will work. We not only know how to solve a quadratic equation, but we understand why we're doing it, what we're doing it, and what its purpose is. The meaning of it. Indeed, the meaning of a variable. It's mental engagement that's the key thing in the doing. not physical engagement. And if we carry that in mind, it takes us forward quite a long way. Teaching us teamwork. The more you look at that picture, the more you realize it's an impossibility. We call that a paradox. Internal contradictions. It defies the laws of three-dimensional space. There are many things in life that are paradoxes. Look at this one, derived from one very well-known author who makes astute observations about teaching and learning. He looks at life. Now that's true in life if you think about it. Humans work together in cooperation to make achievements. Doesn't matter what you're doing in life, that is so often true. It is rare for individual human beings to work entirely in an isolated fashion. Most of the time, we humans were designed and we work best when we work in cooperation together to achieve some goal or target. Whether it's running a shop, sewing to make clothes, being involved in a production line, teaching in a classroom, or even playing sport. Cooperative activity together is common, and yet in education, what do? We call it cheating. There's something wrong with what we're doing in schools. We have so emphasized competition and individualization that we've lost the emphasis on the great skill of collaboration, cooperation, teamwork. That again is worth pondering. And often it's been enforced upon us by decisions taken outside schools, but there are ways round it. Now, an awful lot of things are said about working in groups. I want to just summarize very briefly, what does the research show? Not opinion. Working in groups. Now you can look at it from this perspective. Gaining knowledge and or understanding. And what the research shows, and this may surprise you, working in groups rarely has any advantages in terms of gaining knowledge or understanding. There are scores of research studies, and you could summarize them, as many people have done, by saying for every study that shows an advantage, you'll find a study that shows a disadvantage. In other words, working in groups is not the key to gaining knowledge or understanding. In terms of gaining knowledge, it's often a disadvantage, understanding 50-50. Where the advantages of working in groups are is over here. What the research shows that working in groups has wonderful power in the development of attitudes. Not prescribing attitudes, but allowing attitudes to develop, allowing thinking skills to develop. Anything from creative thinking, critical thinking, even scientific thinking. There are research studies that have shown them all. But also a wide range of generic skills that are very important in life. Learning to listen to another person and actually understand what they're saying. Skills of compromise, negotiation, discussion, respect for the viewpoint of somebody else where the viewpoint's different from our own. Now that's part of life. And if we are trying to equip our students for life beyond education, working in groups is a critically important thing. There are many advantages. Studies show this again and again and again. Working in groups, teamwork, cooperation, collaboration has a powerful place in education. Now, just some warnings about this. It isn't a question of putting them in groups and say discuss. You need to set a good group work task, and developing good ones will take you a lot of time and a lot of study and reading and preparation to get all the information. That has been found to be always true. But you must have clear goals in mind. You're not trying to enhance their understanding. It might do it, it might not. But you are trying to develop other skills that may be much more important in the longer term in life. But know what you're trying to do. Now, the evidence shows that the best tasks involve some kind of problem where the group of students solve it together. Or it may be an issue that they have to sort out, work out the way forward. But the best areas are where there are no easy answers. It's not black and white. They're coming to the best, not the only answer. And there are numerous examples in the literature of this. But group size is critical, and there's research done from psychology looking at the size of groups. If the group's too small or the group's too large, there are problems. If the group's too small, there can be embarrassment. If the group's too large, you end up with dominant people and what we call passengers who just sit and do nothing. Group size depends on the task, but it's rarely useful to go below 3. 3 can be very useful in some cases, and it's rarely good to go beyond 6. But that's not a hard and fast rule. It depends on the task. And the leadership of the group is important. Sometimes just let the leadership evolve itself naturally. Sometimes it's hardly needed. Sometimes it's useful for the teacher to say, will you lead that group? Because we know our students and who's best to do it. Now, there's good news and bad news about all of this. This is hard going and it's tough, but it's worth doing. It can bring a classroom alight. It can bring your students alight. And it's wonderful fun for the students, and they learn enormously from it. Skills that they will go on and take into life, that will help them in every area of life, including future learning. But the good news is there are many good group work units in the sciences and social sciences across the literature. In various countries and in various languages, these things have been developed. But the bad news is, can you find them? Not easy. And the best way is to find someone who really knows in your particular subject area, who can point you to them. But these people are few and far between. One of the exciting things in my past is to train people to write such group work units. And I find you can do the training in a morning or an afternoon. And then, having been trained, a group of expert teachers can develop these units. Then they help each other to refine them. And then you make these units available across many schools, across many teachers, That makes it cost effective, and I've seen that happen both at school level and at university level. And these are wonderful learning experiences that enrich the learning process enormously. Now let's bring it together some key issues. One of the problems of an education worldwide is assessment. We've lost in assessment the central focus of understanding. Far too much is dependent on recall. And the methods that are used in assessment are far too restrictive. The research has shown wonderful new methods that can be used. But the trouble is, national decision takers only know 2 or 3 methods in a written examination paper, controlled centrally. So we have a problem there. We want our education and learning to be related to learning for life. Learning to life to take us forward. That means that our whole learning has got to be learner-centered. We focus our attention on the learner, not the subject matter. We use the subject matter as a vehicle to develop the learner. And that means the learner's got to engage mentally with the issues, whatever the material may be. It may involve group work, may involve practical skills, but the key thing is mental engagement. Now, we have a problem again. Curricula are overcrowded and built by the logic of curricula, but we can work within this. And in one subject area at secondary level, there's a complete textbook of a past era that took a traditional syllabus with its logic and it presented it in a totally radical and different way. And the evidence shows how successful that approach was. So it is possible. We want our students to develop creativity. We want to be creative ourselves. We were designed, you were designed to be creative. You need variety in your teaching. So we need to vary our teaching approaches and allow our learners to be creative, to generate ideas, to ask questions, to provoke thought that leads to greater understanding. One of the most difficult problems in schools today is how do we cater for those who are very able and those who are not very able, and they're maybe in the same classroom. There's no easy answer to that one. One way forward is to employ more group work and practical activities. And you can find that in a group, an able student can pull forward the one who's not so able. Or you can reorganize the groups where all the able ones are in one group and they stimulate each other, and the ones who are less able in another group where they can work at their own level. There are no simple answers to it, but these are all tactics and strategies we can employ. But it comes back to that. That's what our students say they need. They don't use these words. Why do they find it difficult? Why do they find it unattractive? Why do they have to force themselves to learn? We have to get inside their minds, put our feet inside their shoes, think their thoughts, see it from their perspective, and therefore help them forward and move them forward. There are some of the key issues we've got to address to be an effective teacher. We started with 3 questions. How do we enhance our competence? And there's no shortcut to that. It takes time, effort, and study. And don't worry if you make a lot of mistakes. A great leader of the past once said, "He who never made a mistake never made anything." We don't learn from our successes, we learn from our mistakes. And don't let anyone put you down if you make a mistake. Learn from it. But it's hard going. Time, effort, study to make sure we really do understand what we're doing. How do we increase our confidence? Well, experience helps. But the second thing is very important, affirmative support. Let us, each of us, support our colleague teachers positively, affirmatively, not critically. And those who are in management in schools, it is essential that you adopt an affirmative approach. Never pointing the finger, but being on side with the teachers, supporting them, encouraging them. Every time something works well, saying, that's great. But perhaps the greatest way to increase our confidence is to watch our students. If you watch a student develop, if you watch a student make progress, or perhaps at a parents' meeting a parent says something about the way their student has gained from your class, you can see within yourself your confidence levels rising. Our students can give us so much. That's the most difficult one. I don't have an easy answer to that. So I just put it down. Take a decision. Have as your agenda the best for your students. And when you sense that it's not quite the best, listen, watch, think. How could I make it better? How do they see it from their perspective? That's the starting point, and maybe it will develop. There are some thoughts about teaching. It's not complete, it doesn't give you all the answers, and the reference list here by no means gives everything. It's just a few. A few that just raise some issues. But again, I go back to the book. Chapter 13 draws out much of the research in some of these areas. Have a look at that. It will take you forward in your thinking a bit further. Making sense of learning. We want to be the best teachers we can be. I hope this has given some pointers in that direction.